Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and host to these TechTonic Conversations. Today, I have a very, very special guest, and we are going to talk about something very important and very timely. I am absolutely thrilled to be welcoming Iain Montgomery, also known as Monty to his friends. Greetings, Monty.
Lovely to be here, Dalibor.
It's great to see you. Thank you very much for your time. Iain is a provocateur, as they say, a innovation strategist, and also the founder of Now or Never. It's a boutique firm that specializes in helping, companies did less and do more. And also a very passionate Canadian, um, although not born in Canada, just like
Canadian
me,
transplant,
a
yeah.
transplant Canadian, but very passionate one, just like I am. And today, and on this Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, where we Canadians find ourselves, a few days from federal elections, we were going to have a conversation about the pain and the promise of Canada. And I am very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts. As a provocateur, I'm sure there'll be some provocations in this conversation, Iain. But maybe what we should do first is start by giving you a chance to just maybe introduce yourself to those who don't know you yet. Tell us a little bit about how you navigated your life and career to now be where you are in Montreal, founder of It's Now or Never.
So I've always wanted to live in Canada. This started when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I spent the summer in Alberta. Like I went to Alberta by myself to go spend the summer with my aunt.
Oh,
And
nice.
landing in Calgary, thinking, "Oh my God, this is the future." Shows how naive I was. But I had like a bit of a love affair with Canada. But like my professional background has been, I started out as a very bad accountant, which is ironic that later in my career I worked at Deloitte. Found my way into innovation consulting through a sort of slightly circuitous route with a company called Market Gravity. Was with them in London, then New York, and then sort of again accidentally found myself working with Canadian clients. So historically, what I've done a lot of is a lot of the front end of innovation, a lot of customer research, a lot of talking to people, a lot of going and doing futures and foresight, using that to come up with ideas and then turn it into products, services, experiences, ventures. Um, our paths crossed when Market Gravity was bought by Deloitte.
Correct.
Ran that team inside Deloitte for a few years. We won't go into sort of how I how I act inside a large organized corporate organization. But for the past few years, I've been running a business called Now and Ever, and the whole idea of it is there's like you have these windows of opportunity and moments that companies can seize to go and do something transformationally different.
Yeah.
And I think you have to do that with a bit of a provocative mindset. So sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. And I've done that across all sorts of weird and wonderful industries. So my career started in a lot of financial services and energy. Historically, lately, it's been a lot of transportation and cities. In the middle, there's been retail, lottery and gaming, airlines, all sorts of a bit of public sector, all sorts of fantastic stuff. So yeah, and then used to live in Toronto. Anyone see me on LinkedIn will probably see me complaining a lot about Toronto. So I upped sticks and moved to Montreal a few months ago.
Yes, you moved to Montreal. Yes. And this is how our paths crossed, of course, at Deloitte. When I met you and your team from then Market Gravity, I was just blown away with, well, first of all, the intellect, the thinking, how disruptive you were. So, no, first-hand experience. I worked with you and your team, and it was an amazing experience. Now, let's talk about what we wanted to discuss today. We call this webcast, Pain and Promise of Canada. And you have called Canada the world's nicest underachiever. What do you mean by that exactly?
So you know how most countries have a stereotype that turns out to not really be very real? Like the Canadian stereotype of niceness is there. It's like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it might upset a few Canadians. Some Canadians might be proud of it, but like Canadians are genuinely the nicest people in the world until they're in an airport behind the wheel of a car, but will not get distracted by that. Um, but like I've known Canada as a place where I've lived. become a citizen of over the past 10 years or so. And nothing is terribly bad. Nothing is terribly like obnoxious. Nothing is terribly like terribly awful. But we always seem to, and we have all this sort of bottled up talent and capability and resources, but we never seem to use it to the full extent that we can do. And often that underachievement comes from this lack of confidence to move forward. So most places that have had a big industrial or social kind of leap forward have done that through there are winners and there are losers. Because Canadians are ultimately often so nice, we often try and manage these things so we don't really want anybody to lose out. And I think we often end up losing that ability for anybody to actually genuinely win. And that translates into our corporate industrial base, whether that's like a nobody really wants one of the big five banks to succeed over the other big five banks. At the same time as like nobody really wants a usurper to come in and sort of take away some of their share. We see it in politics, I think, a lot where we want sort of to manage things so there's never a bad news story or never a bad news story that we've created. You fast forward that and we'll come to that, but like the news is just full of political bad news stories, which is the unfortunate thing when all the effort is to try and not have one. And we end up underachieving by often like you have the book by Roger Martin behind you, Playing to Win. Um, and I think that's the sort of fascinating thing of one of the greatest strategic thinkers of our age, Roger Martin, is a Canadian,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yet most of his business practice has been deployed in America. Because Americans tend to have this attitude we want to play to win, and Canadians tend to have this attitude of we're actually playing to not lose.
This is a a fascinating observation, actually. So it's almost like the way I would translate what you said is that w your perspective is, yes, we are actually we are nice people. We are so nice that we actually want to that as a result we seem to be muffled, kind of
Mhm.
muffled in 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 success because we want to make sure that everybody is kind of pulled and protected and doesn't lose. But that right?
I've never heard the word aligned so much as I have in Canadian corporate and government clients. Like you will go around these organizations and like the individuals that I've often worked with in Canada, I would say they're more educated, more knowledgeable, more curious, like than comparable clients that I've come across in the US, the UK, and Europe. But often what ends up happening is the number of stakeholders you'll find in a meeting, the number of people that you have to go and run your idea by, the number of people that want to be engaged ends up meaning that we water things down to the
Yeah,
center. Like, you know what? That's like Dave from Human Resources has a problem with this thing. Oh, we should just take that out. And it's like actually you've killed the
yeah, yeah.
essence of the thing that the customer loved. And I think that that's the thing that leads to underachievement because you never end up having
Trying
a
to
really
please
purposeful
everybody.
direct point of
Essentially, you're
view.
trying to please everybody,
Yes,
clipping off the wings, clipping off the wings that should actually allow you to soar.
exactly that. It's a nice analogy.
Very good. This is I think it's actually a very astute observation. And what I think it's important to hear what you have to say because you actually have done significant work outside of Canada, and therefore you have firsthand experience and you are able to compare this, right? So
Yeah.
this is why I think this is your comments have extra merit in them, right? Um, so you mentioned um, we do have energy. We do
Yeah.
have talent, natural resources. We do have stability of our both economic and political system. What is holding us back? Like we seem to have everything. Is
I
it
think
that like what else is holding us back?
I think there's a lot there's a mindset in Canada that is, and I want to say small c conservative, and it's that conservatism often leads to complacency. So um I look at this through the lens of my family. So my dad's sister and brother-in-law moved to Fort McMurray from Glasgow 40, 30 odd 40 years ago. and it was all about coming to Canada for like a better life. They were basically escaping Margaret Thatcher because my uncle is a raging left-wing kind of political type. The irony is he ended up working in energy in Alberta, which is not typically the place where you find too many people with those political views. Um, but Canada was a place where you could there was a Canadian dream and you could do anything. And I still think there is. However, I think a lot of what has worked with that Canadian dream was then like, how do we protect what we have versus continuing on with the growth mindset? So, um, without wishing to get too political in terms of like the energy debate, it's vaguely farcical that we have this vast amount of energy in the ground, as well as this vast amount of renewable energy existing in the country, that we struggle to unleash because there were bad things that we did with that energy or the way we unleashed that energy 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So while the world has moved on at the context of how you build a pipeline, how you build a railway, how you build a road, how you build housing, we did a lot of that like with negative consequences in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. For good reason, we created lots of legislation and process, and that process isn't just in the public sector, it exists in the private sector too, of these are the hoops that you have to jump through to get a project done. And this has been true in every country in the Western world, pretty much. I just think Canada does it stronger because back to that point of because we're nice, we don't like to break the rules. We don't want to circumvent the system. And
What
while
you're
that might
describing, what you're describing is good intentions,
well
essentially,
intentioned, yeah,
well-intentioned approach that has resulted in a systemic underperformance, and that continues, right?
it all sort of like ossifies on top. So it's sort of this accretive amount of bureaucracy and process. And it's very easy to add process. It's very hard to take process away. And I think that it impinges on our ability to unleash our advantages. I don't even think they're unfair advantages. Energy is the classic one that we can really easily talk about at the moment, because it's such a sort of hot topic in the current political environment. And I say this as somebody who lives in Quebec. Um, I'm still trying to understand Quebec. I say this as someone whose Canadian journey effectively started in Alberta. And I sort of see Albertans and Quebecers at loggerheads with each other.
Yeah.
Of like Albertans going, we pay for you, and Quebecers going, well, stick two fingers up, we have culture, you don't. It's very, very silly. Um, but in reality, like Quebec is an energy powerhouse through hydro and natural resources that it's not necessarily unleashing in the best way that it can. And Alberta should be more of an energy powerhouse through the likes of oil and gas. We don't want to be burning all of that oil forever, and we can't because there actually isn't enough of it. But like we've been in this place of like, well, we to make the transition, one has to feed the other. Whether that's getting oil in a pipeline across the country to water
Yeah.
in the Atlantic, or whether that is ultimately being able to develop the grid infrastructure required for a future generation of renewables and battery storage and whatnot. But we're playing by rules that were created in a time when it was can we try and not spill that oil everywhere, mate?
Hmm. Hmm.
And like, that's the really uncomfortable thing
Yeah.
where um we almost go into work in this cult-like fashion of the rules say this. It's like, yeah, but like let's focus on rather than like arguing about like how hard it is to do this, let's go back and rewrite the rules. And I think like you see that in the energy context, and you see that in the sort of how we build cities context. You see that in the education context. So like I think I'm still right in saying that Canada is the most educated population in the world, or if it's not the world, it's in the Western world. But I think it's like we are hugely educated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Are we educated in the right things? So I sort of see family members who are like going through university, and it's sort of like looking at going, that might have made sense when I was at university 20 years ago. It might have made sense when my dad was at university 50 years ago. It doesn't make sense today, because we're still teaching people in the manner that we've been teaching people when like the context and the technology has changed, where we'll come to this, but through the abundance mindset, learning and knowledge is basically free now.
Yeah.
How you actually learn it, you will learn better probably through spending time with a professor than you will do through like interrogating ChatGPT or Googling or watching YouTube videos or whatnot. But I think that that's the context around all of this stuff. We haven't evolved that, and that's the big thing that holds Canada back.
So, um, what I'm extracting from this conversation so far, we got ourselves into a bit of a pickle here as a consequence of, first of all, we actually are nice and want everybody to, we don't want anyone to lose, which
Mhm.
is kind of clipping the wings of those who could thrive. We are, you call it a cultish like the cultish like positive beliefs that did not translate into they did not translate into economic powerhouse that we could have been,
Mhm.
and that therefore I think something needs to jolt jolt us to get us to actually recognize this, change the attitude if we aspire to, I think, provide prosperity for our country going forward.
Yeah. If,
Like
if you
this is
if you
not
look
like a sustainable direction, is it?
no, and it's if you look back through like history, there's all these examples of countries that have got to this point of the glory days are behind, but there's more glory days ahead, and they end up in this sort of like malaise. And the way they get kicked out of it is sometimes absolutely apocalyptically disastrous. Look at
Yeah,
Germany, sort
yeah.
of
The war, for
Weimar,
example,
World
right?
War, like
Yeah,
war and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah, yeah.
You look at Britain post World War One, and it's sort of you had this sort of British attitude, and it still exists a bit in Britain today. But lots of people knew better and knew differently. But it was they were being ignored, and it took something like quite again conflict to get them out of it. I don't think we're going to get there in Canada, but we are getting there in the sort of the comfort blanket has been pulled down a little bit, and now it's a oh, what do I do about this? And I think like that's a you need a sufficient amount of pain to push through it. And I think we're there.
Yeah. I love the fact that you touched on energy. So yes, I live actually in Alberta, so I am aware of the discussion. What I think is in undoubtedly true, like it or not, that a modern civilization that we are cannot exist without access to cheap and abundant energy. So
Correct.
so that's that is like if you wanna go all the way, if you wanna strip all the onion all the way to the very core, at the very core of everything really sits civilizations need to have access to cheap and abundant energy. And if we cannot effectively make that available at scale, we are not going to be able to industrialize us. That will be an essential component of that future prosperity, right?
It's the like how do you hang these things? So I just been in Spain and like a bit of a I'm a more than a bit of a train nerd. Spain has built this bonkers, amazing high-speed rail network. But you look, and a vast amount of the middle of Spain actually doesn't really have a lot in it other than old little towns and mountains. So it's even more amazing. It's the sort of geographic feat of engineering as you get it over the valleys and sort of through to the coast, between the coast and Madrid. But you look out the window of the train, and there are windmills everywhere.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, there's no point having a train that can go 360 something kilometers an hour if you can't get cheap and abundant electricity to the train.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think like there's an uncomfortable thing in Canada of our energy history has been oil, and we're going to need that oil for a long time to come. But now other countries are looking at their energy future, and it's nuclear, it's hydro, it's wind, it's solar, etc., and using batteries to manage the storage in a different way. And we're still arguing about oil pipelines. And it's a we need the oil pipelines and the other stuff.
And the other stuff.
And I
Yes.
think that that's the uncomfortable place you get to is we end up having this thing where we're trying to win an argument about what happens with Alberta's oil rather than trying to solve the problem of what how do we get to the next stage with Canada's energy.
We yes, but it is like at the end of the day, we have to have access to abundant and cheap energy, like period. This is
Yeah,
how civilization works. If you don't have that, we are going to continue declining
yeah,
as an economy compared to others. Not just in the West, but broadly, the world will be overtaking us, right?
yeah.
So this is actually superbly important for people to understand, right?
Mhm.
And from that, then you can build everything else. But the energy actually is where it starts. I am, as you may know, a techno optimist.
Yeah,
I believe that technology is going to be ultimately a solution that creates the world of abundance, that where everybody has access to all the goods and services required to live a happy life at a fraction of cost.
yeah.
But that all starts and ends with that first question, I think. Yeah. Now, so we touched on the energy, and by the way, you called out so correctly. We have such an abundance of natural resources, not just energy in form of oil and gas. We've got hydro, right? We've got like when you look from space, we are a green and white country, green with forests and then white with snow and that, right, fresh water. So in terms of natural resources, I think if you would take some of natural resources and divide it by 41 million people, like we're the
We're,
wealthiest humans on earth.
we're pretty blessed.
We're wealthiest humans on earth. We just not realized.
Yeah.
So that's one part of that. So natural resources are abundant and as of yet unlocked. But then you mentioned also people. That's also natural resource, right? Par excellence.
So you're a optimist. I think I'm a sort of social optimist.
Tell me,
So
yes.
like, I think we're at this point of technology where like we're still all obsessed about AI, quantum, etc. Yes, very, very exciting. But the natural tendency of what we do as people is take a technology and apply it to the way the world works today. So much of our, rather than going, how would this technology help us reframe and do this in a totally different way?
Mm,
We ultimately get there, but it takes time.
mm, mm,
The thing that frightens me with technology is that, and especially the sort of the current techno mindset tends to be, how do I get this down to a quantifiable piece of data? And what box do I put it in? Because I don't like technology in the context of computing doesn't love uncertainty. That's the if a Brit watches this, um, there was a TV show. It was a little bit controversial back in the day. It's probably not something they show on television anymore because there's some few jokes in it that were sort of socially not so acceptable in today's day and age. But one of the things that everyone remembers is like this lady who's like tapping away on a computer and goes, "Oh, computer says no." And I was having this conversation with a very senior executive from a very large Canadian corporation who, for the sake of posterity, I will not name, but read some of my social media posts and people might be able to figure out who. But they said, we understand our customers better than our customers understand ourselves. And we've effectively stopped doing any form of qualitative customer research. That scared the crap out of me. And this company, every time you use one of their services, they will send you a survey going, please fill in this 10 to 12 minute long survey. And we might put you in a contest to win a gift card. And there is nowhere really where you can type any information in. It's all to get you to sort of a net promoter
yeah.
score.
Yeah.
And it really, really frightens me when we go down this sort of tech route, which is now like, how do we optimize people's lives? How do we make them more efficient? And the reality is, everything's really, really messy. Like the whole history of human progress comes through something quite weird and abnormal and messy.
Yeah.
And we're building for technology to go like, how do I put you in this box?
Mm.
And I think we actually need to be building like the leap for me is how do we understand human psychology better and all the weirdness and quirkiness of how people behave and operate, because it's then those messy collisions that then turn into how we make these things better.
I love
And
that.
I
Yeah.
see that through the lens of like my shtick at the moment is like my background in corporate innovation has always been how do I help you get more digital? And that often manifests in a dashboard or an app. Still need to do better at that. But at the same time, we've completely neglected how do people shop for groceries? How do people get to work? What kind of house do they live in? How do they socialize? What does that mean for social cohesion? What does that mean for when we have an election, we're not shouting into the void at each other?
Yeah.
I think to me, that's the thing that we can, that niceness is a blessing and a curse there, but that will get us to a really, really good place.
Mm. That very very interesting actually, both observation and perspective. Um, let's linger on that talent
Yeah.
question a little bit longer. You said Canada is probably has one of the most um, educated populations on earth. Uh, we produced spectacular talent, and as a matter of fact, what many people still don't know, but waking up to too, that even in this domain of AI, Canada actually has really really strong,
Mhm.
AI centers spread across the country, from Montreal, Toronto, actually, and Edmonton. University of Alberta is famous, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge we have is that we are producing spectacular talent, but we are not, it doesn't seem like we are able to retain that talent or nor unleash that talent's potential. So how do you how do you see the solution to that? How can we make our people one of our unfair advantages in the world?
So there's often this conversation that happens around America versus Canada, and ultimately, if you're a really great Canadian scientist, entrepreneur, academic, whatever, corporate employee,
Yeah.
you are probably at some point going to get spotted by the Americans and lured down to the States. It's not, and we sort of see that as a bad thing. I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing because Canada's a nice place to live in America. So you'll go down, hang out in San Francisco for a little bit, go down to New York and be like, that was a really good few years and come back. At the same time as we'll attract a few Americans who don't want to live in America for whatever state or reason, which is might be obvious right now. Um, I think we worry sometimes too much about how do we be more American, and actually we need to think about more how do we give people opportunities that they would never get in America. So I see a lot in the sort of Canadian VC realm of, oh, we can't compete with American financing. America has a market 10 times the size of ours. That like that's going to lead to people going down to the States. Yeah, fair point, whatever. Um, but then we don't go, what things can you do in Canada that you would find harder to do in America, or Europe or Asia or whatnot. And I think this is where my real issue with Canadian culture isn't necessarily so much the narrative we have at the moment is like point at the federal government. I have a real issue with corporate Canada because we don't use the talent that we have. And I'll use an example of I've heard this from a few people, and I ended up talking to a very senior executive in one of the big five banks who described it as this of what you need to understand, Ian, is that when people do a job at this big bank, we have the model that for the first year that they work for us, they don't know what they're doing and they're having to learn how to do the role. The second year is them mastering how to do the role. And the third year is them paying us back for us taking a chance on them to do the role. I don't think that's entirely true, but if it was, how awful is that? How bad is it that we sort of hold our talent back rather than like pushing them onto the next stage?
Mm.
I actually don't think we give people a chance to do jobs that they haven't figured out how to do yet. I actually think we often like look for people who go, how do we find people that are overqualified for this role and underemploy them? And I think this is the thing that Canada can unleash is we have a huge amount of talent that is underutilized in corporate Canada. And then it doesn't have the permission space to go and experiment and go play and go do different things. And if you look at corporate Canada, why don't we have any big companies really that have gone out into the world and done amazing things? And I know like this was written about really, really well in like the book Why Mexicans Don't Drink Molson. This is a cultural thing that has existed for longer than my time in Canada, longer than I've been alive. But I think like that's the piece to me is how we unleash our talent is we need a mindset shift in our large institutions, and by that I mean corporate Canada and the government of all levels to actually go like we have all this talent, but why are we making them play by these rules that were set before many of them were born, rather than letting them sort of go experiment and go try and go play? Um, because we don't have that, and that's why the entrepreneurs go to the States, is because the American money lets them play down there, and the Canadian investors don't let them play up here. Hopefully that sort of ramble makes some sense, but I think that's
That's
the thing we have to tap into.
this is this is a very powerful and another powerful observation. So what you're saying is that don't worry about those few, those few rock stars that will be pulled, that the gravity of the United States will pull there. Don't worry about them. There are millions of Canadians, well educated, smart, sharp. We need to free them up,
Yeah.
equip them with tools, and free them up to innovate, to create, to advance, to create new things, to experiment, really. And that is really what you advance. That is your message.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like,
Bring the barriers down, make it simple and easy, make it safe to experiment, and encourage your people to do so.
and I think there's this slight tension between the world of work, and I know a few people, and like I'll name drop someone like our dear friend Gord Sanford,
Mhm.
who we work with at Deloitte, now at EY, would always talk about this of like future ready workforce. And like I think you have this tension of you have employers who look at universities as not creating the talent that they need to be ready for the world of work. And I think that's true. But I think still what the employers are demanding from from the academic institutions is something that's still rooted in 2000, not in 2025, let alone 2030. So we need institutions that that educate you, like in driven young people, not just to know, but know how to use the tools, and then understand how do you do that in the cultural environment of a large organization.
Mm.
And I think we're not a million miles away, but it's not working.
Yeah.
I actually don't think it requires gigantic shifts to make it work. And we also need that culture of like, I've seen too many young people go into the workforce and think they know everything. And we end up beating them down by saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing," and we make them kind of hate it. Actually, it needs to be like, "Let me help and guide you through this, and like let's reshape the future generations of this organization." So I like this is again sort of social. You're the techno optimist. I'm the sort of social optimist. This is where if you go and translate that talent pool, which is frankly we have more talent than we know what to do with. How do you then unleash that in those institutions? The bit I'll just add to that is like it's not just Canadians. While there's a bit of like anti-immigrant rhetoric amongst all sort of Western nations right now, we're not having enough babies. We're not having like we need more people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got a whole
100%.
load of problems if we don't build enough homes and we haven't got the energy sort of situation sorted out to like sort of manage those. Like, how do we home and how do we have the infrastructure for those people? But I think like I think that's a really like really great attribute that Canada has of America's brand on the world stage is could not be any worse than it is right now. Britain's tired, Germany's rattled.
Yeah.
Um, like Canada probably has the world's best Western. Nah, arguably Australia might compete with this, but like I'd say Canada has like nobody goes abroad. You don't go abroad and say, "Oh, I'm Canadian." I now say when I'm abroad, I say I'm Canadian. I don't say I'm British anymore.
Mm.
Um, kind of like the Americans sticking a Canadian flag on the backpack. But we have such an amazing international brand. When you throw in all the foreign students that come here and want to make their life in Canada, kind of like when I was a little kid, I want to make my life in Canada.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant that is an advantage that not many places have.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would, yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you. Um, you are also, I heard a term that you used as we were sort of discussing this, and also you use this term quite a bit on your social media, that you argue that Canada has been in a managed decline.
Yeah.
In a managed decline. It's a that's such a powerful statement to make. Can you just unpack that a little bit for us? What do you mean by managed decline?
The thing I first started saying, which really upset some people, was actually Canada's not a real country, which was not a helpful thing to be saying probably when Donald Trump was talking about becoming the 51st state. And I think in a way, I kind of meant it, but like, we over the past few weeks, we've seen this thing that no one else has managed to create in the last 200 years of Canadian nationalism. So I'll park my Canada isn't a real country thing, but like that's where the managed decline thing kind of like span out of. But like we have this again, it comes back partly to the sense of like let's not lose. Um, and like I'll use the train analogy. Like let's look at Via Rail. Canada is a nation that literally exists because people built a railway line across
Correct.
it.
That's right.
Um, in incredible speed through incredibly difficult geography.
Yeah.
At at the time, eye water like it ruined certain people, certain Scottish people in Montreal financially getting it through. But we are a country because we have a railway, or
Yeah.
because built a railway.
Yeah.
Look at our railways today. Like I'm just going to go pick on Via Rail. I don't really care. Um, but we have this situation where um, I used to live in Toronto and I live in Montreal. You can't go between those two cities by train in there and back in a day. It's like you spend 12 hours of your by the time you got to Toronto, you'd have to turn around and come back again. That's a real problem. But we look at this and go, oh, well, maybe we'll do a study into building a railway. And we've done countless studies. Um, and even when we did the last one, we went, yeah, but we don't want it to be high speed. And it was literally the global private contractors saying, like, you guys are idiots. Like, this should, like, even if you don't want it, we're going to give you a high speed bid alongside a high frequency bid because this is a silly thing to happen.
Yeah.
All the while, the people at Via Rail were sort of rejecting or like were challenging that because they saw a new line putting their existing line at risk, and they don't even own the line. They just run passenger trains on the freight track. But to me, that was this example of like we're in this managed decline mode of like just keep those trains running. Let's not worry about are they nice? Are they useful? Do they make people want to travel? Are we maximizing the utilization of them? We're just sort of existing. And it's so frustrating because like that's the example to me of this managed decline of like we don't want the foreign entrant coming into our banking system and rattling BMO because that would be bad for Canada. So we end up having this banking system where like we still write checks. Like I when I moved to Canada, I actually had to Google how to write a check because when I said to my landlord, "Can I pay by like a direct debit?" He was like, "I don't know what that is." So I wrote 13 checks out to him. I was like, "Where have I? Where am I?" And like having like I remember like doing work with some of those big banks and like one of them sort of taking me into his office and saying, "Ian, look out my window." And you could see four branches, literally the four banks that were not his bank out of his window.
Yeah.
And he's like, I look in the windows of those branches, and unless I see anything that they're doing something that I'm not doing, I'm not going to do anything new because doing anything new is risky to me.
Complacence. Complacence. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we would rather manage a system that is out of date, whether that's banking, whether that's railways, and that's the managed decline. It's make sure the old system doesn't break rather than going, but what if we were to design this today from scratch, it would look nothing like what we have today. How do we get there? And building a high-speed railway line is really, really hard. Building like getting our banking system to the state of even like a sort of Middle Eastern banking system these days is really, really hard. I totally accept it. I don't know how to do all of that. I wouldn't understand how to manage all the complicated bits of that system. But the way that you get to that is by going, what are the conditions today? What can we test and experiment? And we're too busy keeping the lights on the thing that's becoming obsolete rather than going, how do we get to the better and new future? So that's what I mean by the managed decline piece.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have I just haven't seen the energy and the enthusiasm and the appetite from whether it's a big bank CEO or whether it's from city mayor, provincial premier, federal minister, federal prime minister. I don't see that. Like I feel like again, we're back to playing not to lose rather than to
Yeah.
go ahead.
You have this playing not to lose instead of playing to win is, I think, superbly great description of what you are talking about. Um, so now you also said something interesting that the 200 years it took for Canadians to get a sense of nationalism and patriotism, and it was Donald Trump that jolted
Yeah.
us into that moment. We have the moment now to grab, to hold, and to drive. And I want to ask you this: if we stop waiting for permission, if we stop this mindset of playing not to lose, um, what bold moves should we be making first, second, third, fourth? Like what would you do? What are the bold moves?
So I think we have a big come to Jesus moment that happens 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
So new elected prime minister, even if the incumbent wins, and it becomes a how do I bring this country together? How do I have this moment of like one side has been saying how everything's broken and they're not necessarily wrong, but then when you're in government, you got to go do something with it. The other one comes from it of like it's effectively said this before. It's effectively like you've been the consultant at Deloitte and McKinsey, and you've now just been brought in as the external CEO, and you can't make any new hires.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, how do you become the new guy? Um, I think like that's really, really exciting. So that to me, that's the sort of the starting point for this from the government side of it. You then need the private sector side to buy in. But where we can be in 5 years is do not worry what Donald Trump says or does or tweets. Like it's gonna happen. We cannot control Donald Trump as much as we might like to believe we can, or we can have an influence. It's just not gonna
Clear.
happen.
Yes.
Don't worry about it.
100%.
With all of that, that then frees you up to go, what can we do? What so it's sort of saying what's the biggest possible vision of the Canada that we want to create? Big, lofty, ambitious goals, and I think those visions do not have to necessarily all be the same and all match. And then what are the smallest possible things that we can start doing today, whether that's us as individuals or whether that's in startup land, whether that's in a sort of corporation, whether that's in um, a ministry or whatnot. But like, what are all the things that we can do today that then start making that change through the sense of an experiment? And I think that's how we get there. I think in 5 years, like maybe this is me sort of in dreamland and sort of projecting too hard, but I think in 5 years Canada will be closer to Europe than it is to America. I think that will mean that we've transitioned in terms of like the actual physical travel connections we have to Europe, the goods and services that we trade with Europe. I think that's going to be a huge thing. But you have to start doing things to sort of move you in that direction to make it possible versus just send a prime minister off to go have a nice cup of coffee with Emmanuel Macron or um, Olaf Schulz or whoever. Um, I think what we'll have is a much more realistic relationship with the developing world, whether that's Southeast Asia, whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's Africa. Um, we've been so focused on like how do we like create supply chain links and business relationships with the States that we've actually neglected this huge amount. Like when Trump did his tariffs, it's like, hang on, that's 12% of trade in the world revolves around America. Like let's go worry about the other 88% of it. Um, so I think like that's a sort of it's getting out into the world, seeing how the world works very differently to what we have in Canada. In some cases, quickly copying what other places are doing. Back to my trains point of like Morocco has a high-speed train. Morocco got a high-speed train by copying the French and saying to the French, "Can you come build us a train?" And they did. Um, Doing more of that more quickly. We don't need like it's all moving beyond the studies and things like that. Actually starting to do the building. I think that's the sort of really exciting view of Canada as a sort of international, progressive, socially liberal, fiscally conservative trading nation. But to do that, we have to start doing what's the smallest possible thing that we step us in that right direction.
I think that so trading nation. Yes, I think that there is a yes, and I would say and. I think that and we have to become truly industrialized.
Hmm.
We have to be industrialized to the point where we can generate end-to-end solutions for both products and services And that has to sit on top, as I said in the beginning, abundant, cheap energy that will allow us to create industry, that will allow us to manufacture products and services, that will allow us to then trade as
Yeah.
independently as it is possible. But I also think it would be a mistake for us to just, we cannot ignore the fact that we are an appendix of the United States and that we have 380 million people south of our border. So to me, the answer should be yes, Canada as an independent, strong, free, prosperous, industrialized nation, full of brilliant, educated people with this vast amount of natural resources, successfully orchestrating flow of goods and ideas and services around the whole world. Like, wouldn't that be a great future?
It's that my point around like ignoring Trump is go focus on making yourself so desirable that
Yes.
these guys aren't trying to go, well, we want your auto industry down here. Get it to the point of, hang on, how is your auto industry so good that we need you? Um, and it could pick and choose any industry you want,
That I
basically.
like that. I like that. Yeah.
It's like it's the I used to joke about this at Deloitte of like I slightly struggled at Deloitte at times because the way I did it was not the way Deloitte did it, which is kind of why Deloitte had bought the company that I worked at because we could do things Deloitte couldn't do. And if it was more about like me trying to integrate myself into the firm and be more like the firm, the more I did that, the more upset I got, the harder I had to try, and the more I got rejected. Whereas the more I just went, well, sod this, I'm going to focus on being me, and everybody would then go, Ian, we really want to work with you on this project. And I'm like, sorry guys, my team's a bit busy. Can I have 5 more employees? And they're like, yeah, okay. Um, like it's that sort of like thing of just focusing on yourself. Like, I think. Um, a horrible analogy, and I will apologize for it, but like Canada's going through an abusive breakup. After you go through an abusive breakup, you sort of go, I have put on a bit of weight, and I have been dressing kind of badly, um, and I probably will have got a bit boring. I'm going to go like travel a bit, become a bit more interesting. I'm going to work out a bit more. I'm going to eat a bit healthier. And you become a more interesting and more attractive and more desirable person. That's what Canada is. We're a bit fat and frumpy at the moment.
Oh my God,
We've
that's
still got a
lovely.
horrible 1980s haircut. Let's move on.
That is actually that's a great metaphor. Um, Look, you have, of course, made your brand and your career on helping organizations innovate successfully. So innovation is right at the epicenter of what you do. Um, y- y- I would love to ask you about your view on the Canadian innovation angle and how do you, where do you see the opportunities or challenges with Canadian companies and how they approach innovation? And what would you suggest potentially would be the areas for improvement?
So when I first came to Canada, if I opened my mouth, and I wasn't even living, I was living in the States. If I opened my mouth and said I do corporate innovation, That I literally sold work in airport lounges on flight delays when people were like asking to have like stood by the sort of self-pour Guinness tap in the Ottawa airport lounge. People going, can I have a chat with you? Yeah, sure, I'll help you pour a Guinness. Like, fine. I probably live in Canada because of Air Canada delays and hanging out and knowing how to pour a decent pint of Guinness. It's like it's funny. Um, but like back then, like everybody liked the idea of innovation, but nobody knew how to do it. And I'm partly guilty of this, but like the way that we worked as a consultancy was we would sell people in methodology and a process, even if we weren't necessarily too rigid to our own methodology and process. Every large organization has gone and created an innovation program that broadly follows this double diamond, discover, design, deliver, IDEO, what if, market gravity, pick your poison
Yeah.
style process. And it's not wrong. It's actually a pretty solid process. But it doesn't get you to the real innovative magic. Actually, it's the really good stuff is all in the messy tangents and the bits off to the side. And the thing that we have to get like comfortable with is like ambiguity, uncertainty, going off on tangents. It's the sort of like explore, exploit. People call it a trade-off. It's not really you have to explore to be able to exploit. and you have to exploit to be able to have the resources to go explore. Um, Rory Sutherland does this really nicely. He calls it like the sort of the bumblebee theory. So in every, if anyone's not heard this, it's so good. But basically, in every beehive, you have obedient bees and disobedient bees. And the bees will come back and go, "Hey lads, there's a load of flowers that are pollen, like that are sort of have a load of great like fresh pollen over there. Follow me." And most of the bees go then go off and like get all the pollen and nectar and go back to the hive. A handful of bees will be like, "Sod off, mate. I'm doing my own thing. I'm going over this way." And they'll go over that way and they'll go find their own source of pollen. And then they'll
Yeah.
eventually, when one source is, that's the thing that like innovation has to do. And it involves by like wandering off in different places. And the thing that we have to get comfortable with is like that is not inefficiency and wastage. That is literally innovation in marketing.
Mm.
Um, so when you've created this corporate environment where everybody is like focused down this linear path, it will be fantastic for maximizing the quarterly revenue. It'll be great for the short-term view. It's rubbish for like driving innovation and change. And ultimately you need to have and like when those bees are flying off, lots of those bees are going off and finding bugger all, but some of them are
Yeah.
getting lucky.
Some
And
of
I
them.
think that that's the thing for it. If we can get in our heads, like that's the innovation thing that you need. And I would argue, like rather than building, like actually, in addition to building your own innovation team, in addition to having Deloitte throw their greenhouse people at you, in addition to having a UI put their waste-based people in, who are the weirdos that you just would never want to hire? I say this like companies should never like give me a job because that'd be an absolute like Deloitte should never have given me an actual job. They should have just brought me in every so often for 6 weeks at a time. But I think that that's the thing of like Canada has a lot of these great people that are actually like rubbish at doing corporate jobs, brilliant at sort of injecting enthusiasm, momentum, and change. Um, it's then creating the conditions in the corporate environment so we can then go like, right, these are the things we're going to go and place some bets on. Um, to me, that's the innovation piece. I think like innovation goes in these pendulum swings of we love it, new versions of innovation, we hate new versions of innovation. We sort of we sort of like productize it and industrialize it. We need a bit more of the experimental craft stuff. And it's starting to happen again. So that's like to me, that's really, really exciting.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I actually have a question. We're coming to time, so I actually have three questions for you. And as I was listening to this conversation as you were talking, this question emerged in my head. We have election in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you if you had an ear of a new prime minister, whoever it is, what would be the top three things that you would advise our new prime minister? What what would be the top three things that you would advise our industry champions, our corporate leader, and what would be the three things that perhaps you would advise a Canadian, a citizen, right? I don't I hope I'm not putting you on a spot, but I would love to get your thoughts on top three things you would say to whoever is the premier, the new prime minister. Top three things of the most senior business executive or executive council, let's say, and top three things to Canadians.
You are putting me on the spot, but it's a really, really good question. Um, Number one for a prime minister is you have to bring people together. Like you want, let's say it's Poilievre take leads the Conservatives to majority. You are not the leader of the Conservative Party running Canada from this sort of this conservative perspective. You are running a nation and you have to change how you work. If you are Mark Carney, you have to show us how you're different to Justin Trudeau, and you have to show us how you are not going to be a sort of ideologue. And I don't think he will be because it's not his stick from the background, but the party has become that. But like you have to do like number one thing, bring the nation together. Um, Number two, go explore the world to see how the world has leapt ahead of Canada. Go get inspired. Um, at the end of the day, productivity is like often about the movement of money, resources, and people. A Bedouin in the Saudi Arabian desert can send money faster, easier, and cheaper than I can in Canada. That's a problem.
Yeah,
So go explore that, and then have some signature moves. So show progress early.
yeah.
If I was to do that in the train thing, like go start building the easiest bit of that line right away and get it open during your leadership. It might be building a pipe. It doesn't really matter. Have a signature move.
You have mentioned we have this country the way it is because of the railway,
Yeah.
and like it is. I am transplant to Canada, but I'm proudly Canadian. And what I have observed in my time here, I've been here for 35 years. We don't have a national project. We haven't had a national project. It's tragic to say this, but it almost feels like we haven't had a national project from the moment that railroad was built in 1800s, for goodness sake, right? So I want to re-emphasize the importance of the third point. Like make something that is going to be not just your signature project, but that will actually be, I think, that could unite the country. That would be my sort of interpretation of that third point. Very good. Thank you for that. How about your advice to the corporate champions?
I think the corporate one is be really honest with yourself. So I hate the term world class. And to be honest, you never hear people in other countries use the term world class. You hear Canadians talk about world class all the time. It's particularly a Toronto thing. Toronto will always go, we're a world class city. Um, I've heard various Canadian banking leaders go, we're a world class bank. And it's like you're good, but you're not the best in the world. Um, to me, it would be go again to that point of like go look at other places, but like go look at places and say like here's the thing that we genuinely aspire to be and what we want to leap ahead and be open and honest of like put the poster of the thing that is better than you on the wall and be like I'm going to beat you.
Yeah,
Um, and be honest about it. So like partly it's a go discover. Number two would be talk about it. Be like actually talk about publicly, here's the thing that you want to become and accept that we're a bit of a laggard. Like it's not doing your company down or doing the nation down by saying we're behind. You're actually doing yourself down by not admitting it. And then go, how will this new government help me? And I think there hasn't been a really great dialogue between government and business for a long time. And I don't think it's just through this sort of Trudeau generation. I think it stems back into other places. But like, what are the things that are really holding us back, or what will get these organizations ahead, and how can the government and business do things together? So again, back to the railway. That railway was private capital, government permission.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think that's to me that's the thing for the corporate execs and corporate board.
That's very good. That's very good. And so Kevin here provides a comment. He says it would be great to take the politics out of politicians. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Uh, and then what would be your advice to citizens, to us?
So I think the common thread actually is as Canadians we need to we're actually quite good at traveling the world. But we do need to get out and see the world a bit more again. So I think like compare like I've just been on holiday to Senegal. It was brilliant, and most people I know were like, "Why are you going on holiday to Senegal?" I was like, "Because I can, and I haven't been there. And I don't know what it's like."
Yeah,
Um, go like I think Canadians are very good at this, like in general, but like get out and see a bit of the world that isn't necessarily the bit of the world that you would traditionally go spend time in, and then reflect on what does that mean for your life at home. I think that's really really important. I think that's really relevant in the context of cities. Of like, I make this point around like cities, and in my sort of challenge of cities work, it's like, why is it we love to go on holiday to these places that we'd never own a car, and we go, oh, it's so lovely. I could sit outside, I could have a coffee, and
yeah,
we're all very happy and blah blah. It's like, but then we go home and we sort of design a life around our pickup truck. Like, why do we do that? Like, that's very very
yeah.
silly. So I think that's a common thread across
Across all
PM
three. Yeah, yeah,
across all three. Um, I think like go and have a conversation, like reach out to people who are not like you, who have a different political view. And more often than not, they'll ignore you and they won't come back. But like, actually go have a little bit of a healthy debate or a healthy argument. And at the end of it, go, right, right, fair enough. Like, I see your point of view. Shall we have another beer? Um, there's too much just shouting at each other at the moment. It's horrible. And it's going to continue whoever wins. And we need to not do that. Um, they have more conversations with people not like you, whether they're on the internet or whether they're in
Yeah,
person. I
yeah,
think that's really, really
yeah.
good.
That's very
I've been
important.
doing a lot of that in Quebec. Of like, I've learned so much about sort of Quebec nationalism,
Yeah.
um, and it's been really helpful for me to sort of build my network and learn about it. And in some ways, it's changed my point of view as well. Um, and I think in terms of like then at work, like go be what's the naughty thing you can do at work? How can we be rather than like good, nice, conservative Canadians at work and we want everybody to be aligned and happy? What's the naughty and cheeky thing that we can go do that we can sort of beg for forgiveness on that probably like and it's not to be a dick at work. It's actually to be like what's the thing that I probably don't have permission to do that I can go and do a small thing and then come back and share it. Um,
Imagine if everybody took that perspective. If
yeah,
everybody who worked took that perspective, how far along we would be in a year. If all the working population, right, was encouraged to say, you know where the issues are. Bring them up. Come up with an idea. So like, right?
so I did this. I did an interview last week. I haven't published it yet, but it was with the Chief Development Officer for Pittsburgh International Airport.
Hmm.
And I know it's American, but I think it's a really good precedent for Canada of so Pittsburgh years ago used to be a US Airways hub. US Airways got acquired by American Airlines, and Pittsburgh got dehubbed because American Airlines went, this is no longer strategic to us.
Yeah.
So their airport like vastly shrunk in terms of traffic going through it. They then went, right, we need to right size and rebuild our airport. And they spent $120 million redesigning their airport. And it was beautiful. And they actually hired multiple conflicting firms that like didn't necessarily get along with each other. The guy described himself as a marriage counselor. And then just as they're about to press go, the pandemic hit.
Uh-oh.
And it was and all the funding got pulled. And they were like, oh fuck, this is a problem.
Yeah.
And what they ended up doing was like literally sleep on it and the following day go, right, we go again. What can we now do that we couldn't previously do when there wasn't a pandemic on? And they used the time to go create their own special microgrid so they were more resilient from the local grid. They used it to change the design of the project. And at the end of this year, the new terminal will open. And I love that from the sense of like they were literally an airport in managed decline and they've used it to reinvent themselves. And they've done that with hiccups along the way. But that crux point of like all of our funding has gone, let's keep going. To me, that is like magic.
That was a gift, right?
It's naughty. It's naughty. Like you
Yeah, it
shouldn't
is.
really be doing
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Ian, this was fantastic. I want to thank you very much for your time and for your wisdom that you shared. Um, for all the audience, this has been recorded, of course, and soon we'll be posting it on TechTonic Conversations. Ian, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I want to wish you a happy Wednesday and look forward to
Thank
staying
you.
connected with you, my friend.
Have a great Easter.
Have a good Easter indeed.
Thank you, mate.
Take care. Bye bye.